Hi friends, my name is Darren Gerdes and I do these daily updates on Ukraine. Today we're going to talk about the contrast between how Ukraine is handling the same event as Russia with this Ukrainian war, this terrible, terrible war. So I think the contrast is really stunning, and here's what I'm going to cover. Last night's missile strikes, today's drone strikes, how Ukraine has responded to that, how Russians celebrated for perhaps the last time that they're going to celebrate like this for a long time, some insights into Russian difficulties and insights into Western economics, and some potential global flashpoints in 2023. And I would appreciate it if you would hit the like button, or if you haven't seen me before, subscribe if you get some value out of this. Okay, let's get to our first article now. Okay, so the first article, Kyiv's drone depots were targeted, says Moscow. So they launched about 20 missiles yesterday, and a missile barrage has targeted Ukraine's ability to launch drones at Russian territory, Moscow's defense ministry said on Sunday. They said the goal of this strike was achieved. Kyiv's plans to carry out terrorist attacks against Russia in the near future have been thwarted. Okay, one, we don't know that they actually struck that warehouse, but it'll come out in the wash. If they continue to strike deep within Russia, we'll know that this hasn't actually been achieved. But I don't really care for the way that they call this terrorist attacks against Russia. It's not a terrorist attack by definition if you're striking a military target when you're at war with another country. So they need to settle down with the way that they're writing this. Okay, so what was actually hit? Russia launched 20 air and ground-based cruise missiles, and only 12 of them were shot down. That's a pretty bad ratio, and so that's what happened last night. Then this morning we had a huge drone attack. So Ukraine shot down 45 Russian drones overnight as the country rang in the new year, and so that's kind of a terrible way to ring in the new year. Now, the wreckage of the drones were kind of interesting. One of them had this on it. This I can't read the language itself, but it apparently is translated as Happy New Year. So this was the gift that the Russians were giving the Ukrainian people. Now, for New Year's, I showed the contrast between Zelensky and Putin, and I just want to show you a little bit here. Here's Zelensky giving his speech. As the sirens blared in Kyiv in the early minutes of 2023, some people on their balconies shouted, "Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes," and I'll show you a clip of that in just a moment. On the other side of that was Putin, and Putin was trying to look all symbolically like he's tough in front of his military soldiers. Somebody pointed out that these are the same actors that show up in other things. I don't know anything about that one way or another, so I can't give credit. But if you do find an article that can show that can show the same faces or whatever, I'd love to see that. I'll give you credit for having found it. Okay, while we're on that subject, here is Putin's address, his actual address, and I talked about this in the last video, and I also talked about Zelensky's address in the last video, and I went over them and I showed the contrast, and there was a contrast. But the contrast today that I want to talk about is the contrast in the reactions, the way that the people are actually processing this. In Russia, they're thinking, no big deal, I'm going on with life, and I'll show you how they're going on with life in just a moment. But really what I want to show you is this. This is really fascinating. Here is what the reaction was in Ukraine itself on New Year's Day.
Ukrainians in the capital, Kyiv, shouted out, "Glory to Ukraine, glory to heroes," after midnight on New Year's Day as air raid sirens wailed across the country. It was a somber rally after Kyiv endured a barrage of at least 20 cruise missiles on New Year's Eve, which killed at least one person. Later attacks apparently began minutes after a New Year's speech by President Volodymyr
Незалежної України. Як це було?
And that speech was amazing. I mean, I went over that speech with a fine-tooth comb yesterday, and it's amazing.
They call themselves Christians, said Zelensky, but they are following the devil. And in part of his message to Russians in their native language, he said the war was not with NATO, as Russia says, but for Russian leader Vladimir Putin to maintain power.
And that's exactly right. It's Putin's war to stay in power, because if it wasn't for if you took out that element about him staying in power, he would never do this. This is just bizarre.
Live. Meanwhile, in Moscow, Putin delivered his own New Year message on national TV, stood in front of his troops. He said they were fighting for the motherland, truth, and justice.
Notice how he's in a suit and a tie, and notice how He is in Moscow, safely ensconced there in a suit and a tie, and Zelensky was actually on the front line in multiple places over the course of the war, whether it was going up to Bucha after it was liberated, going out to Kherson shortly after, or going out to, while it's actually still the front line, going out to Bakhmut. So there's a significant contrast there.
Putin also repeated allegations that Kiev and the West reject, that the Western NATO alliance plan to use Ukraine as a platform to threaten Russia. Instead, the West and Kiev say Putin launched a baseless war of aggression in a bid to seize territory and install a regime more to
And that's what it was. It was a baseless war to achieve this historic gains or to protect these historic homelands. You've got to see this speech. So if you haven't seen it, go back and watch it. Okay, let me go on to the next item. And the next item is this. Russia celebrates its New Year. So you saw the darkness and yelling, glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Well, this is what it looks like. This is RT, and this is what it looks like in Russia. Russians across 11 time zones, they're saying that for a reason because they want to go see how big and awesome Russia is, have welcomed in 2023 with major cities decorated in festive illumination. So this is how Russia is decorated. And I got to admit, it does look pretty, but it's very sad when you think about what's actually going on in the world, and yet they're mindlessly, gloriously, blissfully unaware of just how bad things are because of what their government is doing to the people of Ukraine. So I just want you to get the contrast, see the pictures, and understand this probably is the last time that it's going to look like this for a while. If my spidey senses are correct, next year will be a lot more gloomy for Russia because it's going to, the character will change. And you saw some of the change in the character in Putin's speech, and it'll change. Just that's my projection. Okay, now let's shift gears again. The reason that I'm saying that it's going to change, or you start to see, so it's kind of like a puzzle, right? And you start to see certain things kind of fit in and you go, why are they doing this? Well, they're doing this because they have to do that. And so here's one of this, then that kind of things. Russia grants tax amnesty to encourage troops fighting in Ukraine. But wait a minute, if they're gloriously just defeating the enemy because they're so awesome, why did they need to be doing a tax amnesty to encourage them? Because their morale's in the toilet. Well, why is their morale in the toilet? They don't know what they're fighting for, or that they should be fighting what they're fighting for. And they're getting slaughtered, and they're running out of ammunition, and this and that and the other thing, right? So here we go. Russian authorities have announced that soldiers and state employees deployed to fight in Ukraine will be exempt from income tax, Moscow's latest effort to encourage a support for a military campaign against Kyiv. Okay, Moscow Times reported that President Vladimir Putin signed a decree on Thursday removing requirements for government officials to disclose their income tax returns for the duration of the war in Russia. Whoa. Okay, so government officials can be full-on corrupt for the remainder of the war. That's what it's going to allow to happen. But the decree also allows civil servants and military to be part of this. Prior to the decree, Russian law required civil servants to publicly disclose income tax returns for themselves and their immediate family members in an effort to curtail endemic corruption. Now, the decree also exempts soldiers fighting in Ukraine, as well as members of the security service from releasing their tax returns, as well as officials who have traveled to Russian annexed regions of Ukraine for work. This is just encouraging full-on corruption. I mean, that's what this is signaling to me. I could be wrong. Tell me if you think I'm wrong, but I think that's what's going on. Okay, let's go to the next article. Now, this is about the economics. And now I've taught some lower level econ. I have enough credit hours, graduate credit hours to be able to teach some lower level econ, but I'm not an economist. And I would urge you to find experts wherever you're watching. Find people who are actually experts, like a Ukrainian on the ground who can explain what's going on the ground, or how, culturally we see it that way. Listen to those kinds of people. When it comes to military matters, listen to somebody who has some military expertise or is local or both, right? When it comes to, like I filter through leadership because that is so the speeches that I went through yesterday for New Year's Eve, those speeches were actually like me taking on my hat of what I do and saying, like, listen to what he's saying. Now listen to what he's saying. Do you see the difference? find expertise. I could walk into an art gallery and I could see a painting and I say, oh, that's a nice painting. But somebody with the expertise from art history is going to see it totally differently. So with that, I'm not an economist, but I think there's something valuable here. Okay, prices for commodities like oil, natural gas, and wheat soared after Russia invaded Ukraine in February. The euro fell below parity with the dollar. These 5 charts show that the market chaos sparked by Russia's invasion may actually be coming to an end. Now that's really good news for the West, and it's really bad news for Putin. Let's look down a little bit further. Crude oil, natural gas, and food prices have all fallen back to their pre-war levels after spiking in the immediate wake of Russia's invasion. Now, so Putin is counting on the idea that the West is going to be kind of bowled over by the economy, by inflation, by food prices being in bad shape, by energy prices being in bad shape. And that's going to cause them to want to make peace sooner. Okay, or for the West to detach itself as being a partner with Zelensky, but I don't think that's going to happen. So here we go. Oil prices soared in the weeks after the war broke up to just under 130 a barrel in March, and it's now around 80 a barrel. So here is the 2 major measures, and here it's at about $70–80 a barrel. Russia invades Ukraine, $92 a barrel. Where is it now? It's lower, right? So over time, now it had spiked for quite a while. It was higher for quite a while, many, many months, but it's lower. And you're going to see the same trend. It's not just oil prices, it's other prices like liquefied natural gas. So here we got the natural gas prices. Here's the invasion at about $80, and here's where we are right now at 110. It's not all that bad. Russia invaded Ukraine. When it went up, it spiked real bad right about that time. But before that and right after, okay, so look at that. That's pretty amazing. Wheat futures spiked at 14. Again, it just went. Here's the invasion, and here's where we are now. It's below where it was before the invasion. And then finally, Chicago Board of Trade with corn prices. Now this is the last one. I think there's one more. Okay, here and here's where we are. I mean, and the euro bounced back as well. The euro fell below parity with the dollar, and Putin made a big, a lot of noise about how, see, the West, the United States is lapdog, and your euro is sinking, and it's going to be so bad. He was making all these kind of comments and public statements, and it's come back. It's not quite where it was, but it's not that far from where it was. It's coming back. And so that's really, really interesting to me that it's back to pre-war. So that means the economics that would pressure the West to make peace with Putin are less in play than what it originally was, or at least in Putin's mind it was. Okay, let's go on to one more article, and that is this. These are some predictions for what's going to happen going down into the future in 2023. It was a good year to bury bad news. And by the way, this Simon Tisdall, he's had a lot of really interesting insight. I don't know that I've agreed with him on everything, but he's had some interesting insights. Good year to bury bad news in Myanmar and Yemen, Mali, Nicaragua, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Somalia, and Afghanistan. Probably the only one that you're paying attention to was Afghanistan. The rest of them, you probably don't even have like a mental map of what's happened there unless you're really astute and really plugged in. So all these things got overshadowed by Ukraine. Other international crises, actual or looming, will demand increased attention and resources in 2023. 3 geopolitical battlegrounds in particular may be harder to ignore. China's domineering behavior in Asia, the Middle East quagmire, and the US-Europe tensions. Shifting priorities will ultimately undermine Ukraine's ability to resist and defeat Russia. It's unknowable, but it's surely Vladimir Putin's best hope. So what they're saying is that Putin is hoping that these other things, like if China invaded Taiwan, now we have to look 2 different directions to deal with those different threats. Rising military tensions in East Asia require particular attention, as illustrated by Japan's stunning decision, and it is a stunning decision after World War II, to roughly double its defense spending. Japan is 9th in the world in military expenditure. It is now prospectively moves up to 3rd behind the US and China. That's how seriously Japan is looking at what's going on with China. Okay, so that could, like, if a war blew off there and China, Taiwan, and Japan's involved and the US is involved, that could really take our eyes off the game. Putin would love for that to happen, but I'm not sure that the Chinese exactly want to get into that, at least not just yet. The same factors that have induced South Korea and other regional countries to raise their game militarily. A common fear, China. When General Mark Milley, chairman of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, recently suggested Ukraine consider peace talks, this nightmare scenario of a war on two fronts was possibly on his mind. Perhaps he, like Japan, was also thinking about a third potential adversary, North Korea, and its proliferation of nuclear missiles. And that's not all. It gets even worse. There's the Middle East. Benjamin Netanyahu was just made prime minister, so he's a steady hand. He's a bit of a hardliner, but he's a steady hand. He's an old hat at this. But Iran is near its boiling point, and there's Israeli-Iranian military confrontation that could be coming down the pike. That would divert our attention as well. So there's Happy New Year, he ends. Because there's all this thing, and the reason that these are important is because these events could have a significant impact on how the Western allies can support what's going on in Ukraine. So that's what you need to know there. Okay, thank you for your time. If you want to support this channel, please hit like. If you're not a supporter of this channel, if you haven't been here before and this is new to you, please, and you're listening to this still, please subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow. And if you'd like to support this channel financially, you can buy me a coffee. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate that you care. Thank you for caring about Ukraine.